Oh, hi there. If you like cricket in a way that brings you to, the good areas channel, then I think we have the game for you. Hit Wicket is a mobile game that is way more than just about, smashing your screen. It's about strategy and what you really try and do inside a cricket game. However, there's still a little bit of fun and gaming involved because you can get superpowers when you get things right. And it's not just about playing either. You can build your own team and coach it and manage it and do all those other things that, let's be honest, you really want to do all the time when it comes to cricket. So download the game now. Bring out the cricket pundit in you and download Hit Wicket free for mobile. Because Hit Wicket is a cricket game made for you. Stick it in your pocket today. Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. Sorry if you were here on YouTube Live. I'm a little bit late because Australia took Serbia to overtime in the basketball, and I thought I'd prolong the inevitable despair that I was going to get. And it's very weird watching your favourite player beat your nation in the Olympics. I don't know if I've ever had that before, so there's something there. Wagon Wheel is the podcast where we answer your questions on cricket. The best way to put them in is obviously at patreon.com/Jarrod Kimber. You can also buy my book, signed copy of my book over there if you want it as well. So that's a very good place to go if you want to be involved with Wagon Wheel. But if you're watching on YouTube as well and you want to put any live questions in, Super Chat is the way to go. I think I've got a ton of questions today, so Super Chat is probably the only way to go today if you're in the lives. Bloody Bugger says, why umpires used to bend their knees in a bent back, almost squatting position. Yeah, it sort of faded out. I'm not sure how much of it was a bit of a holdover from the old back foot no ball decisions as well. So I don't know if that was a part of it, but there was certainly an idea that the lower you were, the easier it was for you to give LBWs, which probably makes sense, right? But over time, you should, whether you actually need to do that or not, I'm not sure. But I think that was a big part of it. I'm not an expert on this, but I'll tell you what, the next time I see Bumble, I'll ask him because he'll probably know more about that. But I think it was a bit of a holdover from the back foot no ball law. What's the biggest upset in Test cricket? Individual match, not series win. West Indies beating Australia recently would have to be up there, wouldn't it? Trying to think of some of the other big ones. India, I suppose that is a series win, but India beating England at the Oval was probably a pretty big upset. I'm trying to think of some other great ones. West Indies losing to New Zealand in '79. Another one that comes off the top of my head. I'm trying to think if Zimbabwe had any great ones. Yeah, those are the ones that sort of instantly come to my mind anyway. Might be, yeah, I'm trying to work out how we would even do that. Maybe we could, the best way to do it from a mathematical point of view is probably working out what the ELO ratings were for teams at various times and, and doing it from there. Christopher says, at Edgbaston in England's second innings, West Indies didn't review route, which would have been overturned. England were 3 down at that point and had 3 reviews left. I believe that they finished the innings just using 1 review. Besides it being route, at which you could say it's always worth going to be the risk. At the same time, with batters with not many wickets left, but all their reviews on an LBW. It strikes me that teams are too worried about taking risks using reviews. Are teams being educated enough on how to use them? Look, I don't think really many teams have got a really rock solid system for using them yet. I think if you're going to use them, it probably makes more sense on LBWs than anything else. So when you do have LBWs, I think those are the ones worth punting on because of, clipping stumps and everything else. Whereas it's either binary in a caught behind, right? It's you either were right and you get the wicket or not. I wouldn't say that teams aren't. I mean, that's a case of a team not doing them. I've never seen a lot of research on how often teams are left with reviews and everything else. And I don't know if we could do it with our data set. But that is something that that would be really interesting going ahead and looking at how teams are actually gone with reviews in certain periods and everything. But doesn't seem like it was a good one, Christopher. Ian says, I heard on last week's Wagon Wheel that you were rightly proud of your Basil D'Oliveira double century series. Yes. I wonder if you'd contacted Worcester or even Brett, his grandson, who's still playing. No, I very rarely do that. I don't know if they've heard the podcast, or like I did a slightly different video for the YouTube as well. It's not something I do. A lot of journalists do, and a lot of bloggers and all sorts of content creators do reach out to people. It's very rare I would reach out to someone unless I was already involved with that person or the family in this case beforehand. So, you know, if I've already got a long relationship, I remember 2 pieces off the top of my head that I know I sent to the person was the piece I wrote about Asif Karim, the piece I wrote about Sean Tate. But I didn't spend a long time with Sean Tate, but I thought it was a really good piece on Sean Tate, and we had spent some time chatting. And Asif Karim, I spent ages with Asif Karim, so like, you know, he's a lovely guy. I still never met him, weirdly enough, but so in those situations, I would send it to the players or the people involved. Very rare do I do it though. It's just not what I do. I've been contacted by some really interesting people. I did a Twitter thread, I think, on Laurie Saul, and Laurie Saul's family reached out. Rachel Hayo Flint's son reached out when I did something on her. So, you know, if we're talking more like older people, and some people, I've done some stuff on Bob White, and a few people have contacted me about Bob White, who are obviously, you know, friends of his from that point of view. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's just not the way I do things. It's not, you know, everyone's different. I'm not saying the other people are wrong or anything. I just don't like to do it. I remember in the old days, there was a few bloggers who got very big, especially when Twitter first started, by just tagging people that they'd written really nice things about. Look, I think of recent time, Shahid Afridi retweeted something I did of his, and someone else, I think, as well, did it. That's fine if they want to do it. And I'll, you know, if they say something nice about something I've done, I will thank them. That's pretty much where I end it. Unless there's a relationship there, or, you know, they reach out. And, you know, I've had really good relationships with players that have started with me writing about them, and I've had horrendous relationships with players that started with me writing about them. James says, how would you rank Sourav Ganguly among the India Test and ODI captains? Look, I think in terms of importance, he's right up there just because he made them think differently about cricket. And I think that's a underestimated side of it. I think you have to divorce the batter, because he really wasn't probably, you know, a great batter. A lot of his runs in Test cricket, I think I looked this up once, I think I'm right in saying, came from draws. Very good player in limited overs cricket, but again, probably not a great, and not a fully rounded player. But as a captain, I think he had a huge part to play in India feeling like they belonged a little bit more. Feeling like, I think there's always been this element, if you go through the history of Indian cricket, which is hilarious now, of them feeling like they were the ones who got bullied. They were the ones who got pushed aside. They were the ones who got sledged. And Sourav Ganguly obviously was a big part in them sort of changing that. I think even separate to that, it would have happened anyway, only because Indian society was changing, and of course the money and the power and all those things. James also says, in the short doco, The Making of Pat Cummins, he discusses the technical flaws in his run-up and action that Dennis Lillee pointed out as likely contributors to the stress factors of his back. Seems incredible that Cummins could have gone through the representative New South Wales Australian talent pipeline without people doing that. Look, it's tough. I don't think I've ever seen a fast bowler where someone hasn't said, I think there's a problem with his action that can bring him down. And do you action that every time? Dennis Lillee's been wrong before, right? Like, not. I mean, he is a genius. You know, maybe the best fast bowling coach / bowler we've ever had in history, but he's been wrong before. And so, do you listen to Dennis Lillee over other people who are saying, "Look, we think we can get away with this"? He did bowl 64 overs or something in a game against Tasmania in a Sheffield Shield final. Maybe even if he had a perfect action, there would have been some issues there. And it's also tough if someone's bowling at 90, what was he probably back when he was young, 93, 94 miles an hour. Do you want to stop that, fix their action and bring them back? These questions are not easy. And you could argue here they've made the wrong decision with Pat Cummins. Maybe there are other bowlers that they've made the right decisions with. It's just not, it's such, we're on the verge of it being a science. But I've had real arguments with coaches and biomechanists and all sorts of people about certain actions that I think are wrong that need to be fixed, and they disagree with me, and it's not ideal. Jessica says, when Graham Thorpe stepped away from Test cricket in 2002, was it 2002? Wasn't he playing later than that? His Test career batting average is 41.88. During his comeback from 03 to 05, he averaged a whopping 56. His late career boom coincided with two events in his life. He addressed his long-standing problems in his personal life, and Michael Vaughan became England's new Test captain. Is it possible to argue that Thorpe underachieved across most of his career? This is where I'm going to ruin everything you've just said, Jessica, with the fact that he batted through an incredibly tough Test period in the 90s, and he came back in 2003, 2005 with his mind clear, with a better team on better pitches. I do think there is an element of that as well. I think it was very hard for him to score a lot of runs earlier on in his career just because of the team he was in, the pitches that were played on at that point, and the bowling attacks around the world. I think he's still a fantastic player. So I suppose the question is how much more is 56 of 3 years worth more than 42 over whatever it would have been 8 or 9 years beforehand? But sometimes you just have to take a break, right? Like, that's just, we talk about these things a lot more now. Jessica says, last week, I can't remember which show you're on, neither could I. You said that one-dimensional blockers rarely ever become successful in Test cricket. Does this explain what happened to Akash Chopra? Back at the time, there was a lot of excitement about him. He had a first-class batting average in the mid-50s. Be interesting to talk to Akash Chopra about that. I saw a fair bit of him play. Yeah, I think he was, off the top of my head, let's see if I can bring this up. Yeah, I was going to say strike rate of around mid-30s, and it's 34.6, so I'm going with mid-30s on that. I think that's very tough. I think it's very tough to score at a strike rate of 35 in Test cricket, and certainly lower than that, consistently, because you put so much pressure on yourself, and you face so many extra balls. So I do think there is a big part of that, of you just can't get off strike enough, and you become a bit of a target. But yeah, maybe I should get Akash on and we can talk about that one day on the podcast. Josh says, Evan Gulbis extreme effect extremes. So Evan Gulbis means when you have a longer batting lineup, your batters at the top attack more. That's probably the best way I've ever explained it. So you have a T20 team focused on having a ridiculously good batting lineup, even to the neglect of bowling. So you have 5 batters plus Gale, Pollard, Andre Russell, Maxwell, Stoinis. Does the Evan Gulbis effect max out with how fast your team will try and bat? Does it only make a difference for the effect if 11 batters behind that lineup is Chris Martin versus yet another specialist batter? Yeah, I think by the time you get to 10 and 11, you want specialist bowlers back in your side, would be my guess, for the kind of thing that you're talking about here. I don't think any batter in the world is going to look at 10 and 11 and worry about what the strength of them in. Because even if you have strong batters at 10 and 11, chances are they're very rarely going to face balls and everything else. So I think the Evan Gulbis effect probably maxes out at about number 9. And so the ideal situation, and I've talked to teams about this, not that they talk about the Evan Gulbis effect, but they talk about the general principle of it. Of if you can get that sort of, I don't know, let's go back, Moeen Ali, Chris Wokes, Liam Plunkett, whoever else, Ben Stokes, etc., etc. I'm probably missing a couple of others as well. If you can get them in and they can bowl the combined 12 overs, right, between them, and then you've got Jofra Archer and Adil Rashid at 10 and 11, say, and I'm just making up a random team here, and obviously Adil Rashid can bat a little bit as well, but if you have that kind of lineup, sort of what England were moving towards, then you know that you've sort of got the power play sorted because of Jofra, and then you've got the def sorted, and you've got the middle sorted because of Adil Rashid, and you kind of just need 3 of your other bowlers to have par days, knowing that your batters are going to score so much quicker than everyone else. The 10 and 11 thing is handy, but I don't think you'd ever try and have a strong 10 and 11 over having an actual bowler. And Evan Gulbis effect extreme. Say a team had 5 clones of Jasprit Bumrah on it. How much of a problem is the Evan Gulbis effect? So it's not a problem. We've seen this in Rashid Khan teams, is the best example of this, that Rashid Khan teams can actually bat slower, knowing that they have Rashid Khan available to them. Less so in the IPL, although definitely at times in the IPL, but in other leagues, those teams can literally bat to a point where they're just like, we just make par. That's all we need to do. Adelaide strikers used to bat really slowly in the power play and not lose a wicket, and then attack for the last 14 overs with, 9 or 10 wickets in hand, knowing that sometimes that meant that they probably scored 20 or 30 less than what they could have, or maybe even more than that in some games. But it didn't matter, because then Rashid Khan was going to bowl for them. So they could bat first, bat slow, keep wickets in hand, make sure that they had a guaranteed total. And I have talked to some teams about trying that kind of method, and they all like, yeah, it sounds great if we have Rashid Khan in that side. So few teams do. I think that's a mistake. I think more teams should try and get Rashid Khan where possible. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break here on the Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. I'll be back in a few moments. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today. Remember, also you can buy signed copies of my book via my Patreon page as well, for those of you who like signed copies. Roger says, in my limited experience bowling with a hard tennis ball, I find that my best balls, the ones that don't miss the pitch, are typically like flattish, inaccurate off spin that turns a little bit and has some extra overspin. Who do I bowl most like in professional cricket? And how do I know if I'm bowling fast off spin or off cutters? The second one's kind of easy. Essentially, off spin is bowled with the hips and the finger, right? So that's why it's called finger spin. So if your hips are starting with your left hip facing the batter and your right hip ends up facing the batter, you are probably revolving around your body. You're probably not bowling cutters at that point, although you might be, and that depends on whether you're just holding the ball sort of like that. This only works, Rudra, if you're watching the video. But if you're holding the ball sort of just across the seam and then just ripping your fingers down the side, that's a cutter. Whereas if you're actually getting your finger in to the ball and allowing that to almost callus up on the inside of your finger, that's finger spin. But a lot of it does come from the hips and everything else. Who do you bowl like? Flat, fastish, inaccurate off spin that turns a little bit, has some extra overspin. I mean, the inaccurate part would be unfair to any bowler, so let's take that out. Sounds a little bit like a Washington Sundar type of bowler. A little bit. I mean, he probably doesn't have a lot of extra overspin, but because he's tall, he probably looks like he has more overspin, would be my guess. Richard says, Sehwag, obviously he had great success as an opener, but how would he have done if he had stayed as a middle order player? If he came through today, would he have been used in T20s in that Maxwell role to take down the spinners, giving his affinity for slogging all spinners at any time? Also, what was the key to his success as a batter, given that it seemed like he lacked any footwork? There's a lot of parts to this. Okay, Virender Sehwag, he would have been a very different player if he played in the middle order, because he would have batted, let's say, I mean, he wouldn't have batted 4. But let's say Sacha doesn't play and he bats 4 or 5, right? He's going to start slower because he's not going to have the field up and he's not going to get those cheap early boundaries that he was the king of, right? You know, the Slater boundaries, yeah, the Shane Watson boundaries, the Zach Crawley boundaries. That would be much harder for him, and the field would be set very differently when he would come in. So he would have been a different kind of player in the middle order. He still would have been a fantastic... I think he would have been maybe as good a player in Asia, but I wonder if he would have struggled... I wonder if he would have struggled more, although then you take him away from the new ball. It's a great question. I'm not sure it would have had that much of an impact on him in Test cricket. T20 cricket, I think it's still open with him. There's no way to set a field to him in the first 6 overs of a game. Right, so I can't see how you wouldn't use him as an opener. You can't bowl spin at all in the power play to him. And he's gonna score really quickly against your pace bowlers as well. The role that you're talking about, again, I don't think he'd be bad at it at all, but he's a better player of the moving ball than Maxwell is. So you'd rather have him. He's a better player of the moving ball against Maxwell, but he's specifically a better player of the brand new ball than Maxwell is. So I would do that. When you say he lacked footwork, he lacked an exaggerated footwork. So if you look at his footwork, I don't think it's all that much different than Inzamam or Hashim Amla or Kevin Peterson. What he doesn't have is the big front step. And I think his weight was always in a good position. His head was always in a fairly good position. And he had freakish hand-eye coordination. Like, I think he probably had better hand-eye coordination than, Laxman or Dravid or Tendulkar, right? I think he was probably at a higher level than them, but they were a bit more closer to the ball more often than not than he was. And were probably better when the ball was sort of straighter and on the hips. Ali says, majority of A-list Australian players signed up for Major League Cricket rather than the 100. How do you see the 100 faring? I think he means faring. Against MLC in terms of profitability and attracting players. Look, a lot of it is that I tried to get work in Major League Cricket, and a lot of the work was sewn up by cricket boards, Cricket Victoria and Cricket New South Wales, and then there's some other partnerships. There might have been one at Western Australia or Adelaide as well. So there's a direct link there, right? It helps Cricket Victoria and Cricket New South Wales to do that, so I think that was a big part of it. Also, Australians are obsessed with America, more so than I would say most cricket cultures are. A lot of those guys are NBA fans, right? And so it's almost a direct link for them to want to go over and do that. We saw some Australians go over and have some success even in minor level. They told all their friends how great it was. Adam Crosswaite's a really important person in the history of all this. And it's a new league. I know the 100 is, but the 100's on top of it all. I think there's more exciting opportunities, advertising. I think some of those players would probably want to live in America, and it's a burgeoning market. Whereas, we know what you get if you're playing in the 100. You may not if you play in Major League Cricket. Thomas says, a 10-over single wicket competition is being prepared. There'll be 9 fielders given, plus the 2 players in each side. 4 teams of 2 are needed. Who do you pick? 10-over single wicket competition. I don't know. Andre Russell and Garfield Sobers? Ravi Jadeja and Aubrey Faulkner? There we go. So I'd swap those over. I'd have Garfield Sobers and Aubrey Faulkner together, and I'd have Andre Russell and Jadeja together. And then I'd want Keith Miller. Oh, who would I put with Keith Miller? Ian Botham? Kapil Dev? I think I've won. I don't know. Will says, it didn't seem that Zimbabwe Test attracted much interest in the Northern Irish press. Was it a success for Irish cricket? Look, I haven't talked to them, Will, so I'm not sure at the moment. It was a cracking Test match. It's a one-off. People didn't really assume that Zimbabwe would do all that much. And so because of that, maybe it didn't get the hype that you would normally get for a match like that. I don't know how much the Northern Irish press usually write about it. My experience of working, around Irish cricket is that the Republic of Ireland or Ireland, whatever you call them, press is probably a little bit more interested in cricket, even if people play it a lot in Northern Ireland and it has a strong thing. But I've always felt with the press side of things, it's much easier to find information on the players, I find, from the Republic of Ireland than it is from the Northern Ireland players. So generally, I'm relying more on my contacts at that point. Ben says, out of the top 10 best-selling sports game franchises, football has 3, basketball has 2, golf and NFL, skateboarding, racing, wrestling have 1 each. As India grows economically and technology becomes more widespread, do you think cricket will eventually have a sport game franchise that reflects the global popularity of the sport? Yeah, so I don't know exactly what the other games are, but Madden obviously would be one. I don't know if that would count NBA Jam, but obviously NBA 2K would be up there. What else do you have up there? So from what I could see, just looking at this, you've got football, so that's FIFA, obviously, in the other versions of FIFA, or whatever FIFA's called now. Is it called FIFA still? Right? And you don't have baseball. Is that interesting that cricket and baseball are the two sports most similar to each other, and neither of them have a game there? They both have different kinds of global reach. Is there something about the gameplay in those sports that makes them less easy to learn for other people? I say that knowing that Madden is extremely hard to learn in some ways. And even golf, I've got Tiger Woods golf at home. My son wanted a golf game. I found that can be a little bit tough at times. So maybe I'm being unfair, but I just wonder. Like I played, all the EA games, and I've been playing cricket games since whenever the Alan Border Graham Gooch game came out in the early 90s, right? All the way through to now, and I'm playing the most recent games as they come out quite regularly. I thought EA 19, or whatever it was called, Ashes 19, or whatever that version was from that company in Australia, was one of the first that I felt that I could bowl the way I thought bowlers bowled. And I thought the batting was okay, not perfect, but okay in getting there. And I think it's really, really hard. We put on an old Don Bradman game once, and it was so difficult and so confusing. And I know I played it when I was younger, but I was sitting there going, it's not right. And I just think that, NBA 2K is probably the go-to sports game in our house. It does take a little while to get used to it, but essentially you run down the court, you press pass, you press shoot, right? Cricket is just more interesting than that. And I wonder if cricket and baseball, because of the way that they go together, are not perfectly made for video games. I think eventually we will have a great, great cricket video game that will cross over a little bit. My memory of the old NHL game was really good. It's interesting it's not there as well. So, yeah. William says, I've often heard you advocate for Test and T20 cricket to be administered as separate sports. ODI cricket as well, William. If this did happen, do you think Test cricket would survive outside the big three? Yeah, I do. Test cricket is a very, very lucrative sport in many different ways. One thing that is the amount of hours that it goes up for. It has really good repeat viewing numbers, and the people who watch it are generally moneyed and older and easy to advertise to. If you're in the UK, buy a Jaguar and get your penis dysfunction fixed or your hair loss fixed, right? It's kind of very easy from that point of view to know which advertisers want to be involved with it straight away, how much money you can make off it, everything else. Also, if you separated it from the other three sports, also the other two sports, there's a lot of money that isn't being made at the moment because they're all being run together. For instance, you would separate it and you would run it like a league. And from that league, you would sell the overall rights. The problem with Test cricket at the moment is selling the smaller series. If you sell it as one big bunch, things become very different very quickly. Simon says, pause for pun, what tweak to the law's rules would have been the biggest impact on the game, good or bad? Things like removing impact in line for LBW. What tweak to the laws and rules would have? Things like removing impact in line for LBW or different allowed angle of arm for checking. I mean, we've seen the biggest law change really is underarm to overarm bowling. If you don't make that law change, none of us would be on this podcast at the moment. I don't know what I'd be doing. Probably be still crying because Australia just lost to Serbia. Although, would Australia have lost to Serbia if the world had not... would Australia be better at basketball if cricket was never an overarm sport? There's one to think about for a long time. So that I still think that's the biggest change we've ever seen in cricket. We've got an episode of Stupid Cricket up recently, not too far away, which is quite interesting, which is about the MCC trying to ban boundaries. So that one happened. That would have been a pretty big change. Those are way bigger than the LBW law changes because we've had a few changes to LBW laws, right? And the chucking one is the other one. So when overarm bowling came in, why stop at straight arm? They could have, we know that cricket and baseball developed separately, but we also know that they were aware of each other, right? As they were developing, there is that, why not go in that direction?
Ben says, in club cricket against a spinner or a real dobber, I can pick a gap deliberately. Anyone quicker than that, no chance. I just hit the shot and hope I get the gap. Against the West Indies, Root hit a cover drive from an 88-mile-an-hour delivery. The commentator said he picked the gap perfectly. Are test batters just that good, are doing it at that pace, or can they hit the shot and hope it goes? Yeah, so there's a podcast I did recently, Ben, with Brian Lara. And in it, he talked about how he picked gaps. And a lot of it, he talked about him as a child. But he was also talking about, so I know the gap is here, so I want to hit this one slightly later, or I want to hit this one slightly in front, or I want to open the angle and everything else. That doesn't mean they're always going to nail it, because the bat always hit the middle of the bat. But what they're doing is putting themselves in the best situation to be able to do that, because they have the time that you have against the diddly dobblers is the time that Brian Lara has against 80-mile-an-hour bowling, right? So even as you get up, you can still kind of pick gaps a little bit. You're probably being a little bit too harsh on yourself. But there's a certain speed at which you probably can't pick gaps. And maybe that's, for Brian Lara, is 95 miles an hour. And for you, that might be 55 miles an hour, right? That is what they are doing. But they are definitely picking gaps. But they're not always hitting the gaps. They know where the gap is, and they have a sixth sense. And you can see players who are not very good at this. And I've written about this a fair bit. Oh my God, I've forgotten his name. Azhar Ali grew up as a tail ender and became a batter. And he has all the skills of batting, but he never had the skill of opening and closing his wrists and hitting early and hitting late. And you could see it. He would hit the ball to mid-off for hours on end, hoping that eventually the ball would go past mid-off, right? And there are players that do play like that and hit the ball to fielders a lot of times before they get it through. And then you've got someone like Lara, who you can't really stop him from scoring. Graham Pollock is another legendary one like that. Bradman, that was one of Bradman's big super skills, was his ability of how do you set a field to Don Bradman? He can pick a gap on the leg side or on the offside at any stage that he wants to get off strike if he needs to. And Root is definitely one of the masters of that art, without any doubt. But there are players just below that level who struggle with it. Azhar Ali was a fantastic player, and yet probably wasn't anywhere near as good as picking gaps as players nowhere near with his record. So it's not the be-all and end-all, I suppose is what I'm saying. Cam says, I haven't thought about cricket in 2 weeks. What is going on, Cam? I can't wait for cricket to be in the Olympics. Yeah, I've watched a lot of Olympics as well, and I'm with you. My son keeps asking, about it. I haven't yet dared tell him that he missed 2 ties, by the way, while we were watching canoe slalom or whatever weird event. What's the one with the sausages where they punch each other with the paddles and roll over? I'm all for that one. It's also nice for me to take a couple of weeks off mentally from watching games and watch something else. Obviously, I do generally watch a bit of NBA, but when I'm watching the NBA, it's kind of, around cricket games, whereas this is a little bit more, there's a whole family of people. We're trying to get my sons into basketball. We just had the whole family watching the Serbia-Australia game, which is probably the first time that's ever happened. Outside of maybe the Euros. So, little things like that, it's worth me not watching as much cricket, still keeping an eye on it. But you're right. If we put cricket on in the Olympics, that's it. It would be on every minute of every day for the rest of our lives. And isn't that what we truly want? If you've got any questions for the Super Chat, please put them up. But I'll see if there's any. I don't know. I had a heap of questions today, but I seem to have flown through them. I don't know why that is, but let me have a break and go and have a look at what is in the group. And then we will come back in a moment with a little bit more of this here Wagon Wheel.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
Welcome back to Wagon Wheel, and the first super chat is, of course, about the Serbia-Australia game. How about that overtime performance from Jokic? Look, I mean, he was, even before that, I thought he was in complete control of that game. It was funny, my mum's not a huge basketball fan, and so me and my son are talking about it. My 10-year-old son's explaining the pick and roll to her as it comes up, and, you know, floppy action and all this sort of stuff. She's like, what? But what I was saying to her is, if you watch what happens with him, it's the control of which he has over the game when he doesn't even have the ball. So when he sets the screen, it's like the Red Seas part. And there was one play where it was just like, no one went to Misic, the point guard, just because even though the play was to get Misic free, they were just hesitant, and they just let him go, and he was just standing in the middle of the court on his own because they were still looking at Joker. It's incredible watching someone play like that. And then the problem with Joker is he only plays defense for the last 8 minutes of any game, and of course in that time I think he got 1 block and 4 steals, and Australia had lost. But it's the best basketball game I've seen Australia play at this Olympics, so well done to them as well. It's the best game I saw both of the teams play, really. Sankalp says, would love to hear your views on gender identification and regulations in sport. There is a storm of vitriol against 2 boxers at the Olympics. There was also one issue with a Canadian female cricketer. Sankalp, I don't know if you've seen, but we've interviewed Danielle McGahey, who's the Canadian cricketer that you're talking about. So there's a whole podcast. I don't know how long it is, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I may even be doing another big project on that going ahead in the future. I think the boxing thing is a perfect example of why a lot of people are just wrong. They're just wrong when they talk about this. We did a Cricket 8 podcast when this was all happening, when I think was the Algerian boxer had dismissed the Italian boxer. Well, not dismissed her, she left the fight, but punched her in the face. And there were all these comments about, you know, trans stuff, and it's like, well, this just shows you how bad it is. People don't even know that this is not a trans issue, right? And that's the point that I've been making since Caster Semenya. And I've never, because I don't write a lot about other sports, and it hasn't really come up as much at cricket, I haven't had my views out there as much on this particular one. But the truth is that what science has taught us, this is going to get really, really technical here, but when you watch football now, or when you watch cricket now, the umpiring decisions are not based on us being 80 meters away or 40 meters away or 20 meters away, right? It is literally how close the camera can zoom in and how many different angles there are, which means that we see decisions given out or not out, that, and it's much more technical, the way that the umpires and the referees in those two sports have to give things out, right? What we have done in the last 20 years in sport, maybe 30 years in sport, is zoom in on gender. And this whole idea that there are men and there are women, we now know, and we've always known this, but we haven't known this in sport, because in sport, there's men and there's women. There isn't men and women, right? We now know that 100%. And sport has to deal with this. And I think they dealt with it very poorly in the Caster Semenya situation. I thought at the time, a really interesting conversation should have been, is there another category here? Is there another category that we can look at? Because we thought there were men and women, and now we understand there aren't really men and women, and it's much more broad. And maybe there is, you know, whether it be testosterone or hormone or whatever. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not an expert on those sorts of things. But whether there is another way of looking into that side of things. I thought that would have been a really, really interesting conversation to be had at the time. And instead, sport didn't deal with it. And now it's having to deal with it again through boxing. And on top of that, there's the Boxing Federation, which is obviously corrupt and stupid. And you look at the way that cricket handled Danielle McGahey. Again, incredibly stupid treatment, right? Of these human beings who want to play sport, who want to play the sport that they love at the highest level that they can. We have to get to the point where we have solid science, and we're doing the science not based on right-wing opinion pieces or left-wing progressiveness, but that it's based on the science, and we understand the decisions that we are making are based on the best information that we have, whatever year we are making them. And at the moment, that's not what happens. I saw some of the BBC reports say it was one of the most contentious boxing matches ever, and it's like, no. What happens in boxing is sometimes one person is stronger and they hit the other person in the face, right? That's not contentious. That's boxing, right? And that's why it has to be science. And if you want to go back to another thing, you can go back to the Murali thing. That's why at first I was an Australian who just thought, well, I'm Australian, so I think everyone chucks, even Australians. But that's how I was brought up. And then the more you learn about it and you start going, well, wait a minute, how is one person making this decision? And they're making that decision from 20 yards away, or however far away in some cases. And we start to think to ourselves, oh, we know what is happening, or we don't know what is happening, or we have a bias. That's where science comes in, right? And the 15-degree flex regulation is not perfect. Neither is the fact that we don't test players in-game, which is when we want to test them. But we are moving towards something better. And I hope that we're moving towards something better when it comes to trans athletes, when it comes to women's athletes who might have elevated levels of testosterone or whatever it may be, when it comes to genuine intersex athletes, right? All these sorts of things. We should be learning more. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that we probably, and I know this for a fact, sports science, but you could say all science, never really did enough scientific testing on women's bodies. And now we're having to catch up very, very quickly. And I feel sorry for all the athletes caught up in what has been things that could have been fixed by lazy administrators for generations. A couple of quick ones here. Thanks for the 2 super chats. So, fellas, Chaitanya, I feel like I've said that wrong. Why does it feel Rohit Sharma is batting on a different pitch? Because he's one of the best players of all time, and that's generally what those sorts of players do. You know, AB de Villiers, Brian Lara, they have more time to play balls, and the difficulty when you're playing goes away for them at times. It also helps them sometimes because it makes them focus. Batting can be too easy. You know, Barry Richards has talked about that a lot. Raghav says, what made AB a great batter across formats? I'm assuming he means Alan Border here. De Villiers. We'll go with De Villiers. Did you see anyone had the versatility like him across formats? No one's ever seen that because he's the first player to have that. Technically, he has all the skills that allow him to block out for 5 days or block out for 2 days and to reverse sweep someone. Most players don't have all those skills. Then he has the most important thing, which is the time and the ability to do that. And then he had the work ethic to work on everything to make himself a better player. You put all those things together and you get that. Most players, even great players, are slightly hampered or restricted in one area or another. And especially, there's a big difference between T20 batting and test batting. The chances are you're not going to be great at absolutely every part of it, right? So Brian Lara, who we just mentioned, is probably another person who would have been very fantastic at that. Kevin Peterson was another player, right? Sachin is another player. Kohli is another player. But they're not always, I don't know if they always have all the extremes that AB has. AB now asks, and I'm assuming this is Devos, what do you think of Jonathan Trott as a coach? Look, it's early on. He's coaching the team exactly as he played it. And that makes me excited because they're winning and nervous because what happens when the team changes? Does he have another gear? I think that's really interesting. And it's interesting because the following question is, how is he as a player? Methodical, determined, looking for technical excellence at all time, averse to risk-taking, played as an anchor, played in a complete bubble of his own making. And could be a very stylish player, but it was kind of hard to see it through the dourness at times. And then AB's last question, why so many debutant bowlers do well against India, especially in the last 8 years? I think it's longer than 8 years. And the answer is dumb luck. All right, thank you for coming through to Wagon Wheel today. We are slightly changing Wagon Wheel coming up. No, sorry, we're not really changing Wagon Wheel, but we're changing a few things on the podcast network. Don't know why I said Wagon Wheel. I think it's the one podcast that isn't changing. But just to let you know, there'll be some more flexibility and different things coming up. But none of your favorite shows will change, but they might, when they come out might change, and also the length of them might change in some cases. So we're just adding flexibility now because we're pretty sure that we can get regular podcasts out without any issue at all. And so what we are really trying to do in the future is add then the ability to stay live with things that happen in cricket, and also not do epically long podcasts where we try and tick off every single topic, and trying to pick the ones that we really, really want to talk about and that we're really interested in at any one time. Anyway, that's it for Wagon Wheel. Please, if you can't support us on Patreon, download the Hit Wicket app using the QR code or the link in below, or Nord if you need it, or go and buy my book, or do all three things at the same time. And I don't know, maybe you need a chair as well.
Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, well, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights, or the best quality